NPR, Neda Ulaby.
Hey, thanks for having me. So I do cover television for National Public Radio. It's a job that didn't exist at NPR 10 years ago. The culture was actually such that television was sort of seen as not interesting or relevant to our listeners. Now there's quite a few of us who do cover television, and we're constantly asking ourselves, how do we make this industry intelligible to our listeners? How do we guide 13 million people a day about the evolutions and upheavals that are happening in television in 3.5 minutes or less? And one of the things we think about constantly is what we call the fractured cultureverse. And this is actually adapted from a recent radio piece that I did. And it started when we were, my editors and I were talking about the most discussed show on social media last summer as per Trender. And maybe you know what it is already, or maybe you think you know what it is. And I would have thought maybe it was Pretty Little Liars, or maybe Doctor Who. I was wrong. So on average, Love and Hip Hop Atlanta got about over 500,000 social interactions per episode. By its finale, it had cable's top spot in its time slot for adults 18 to 49. But even though 3.7 million people were watching by the finale, it hadn't broken into the mainstream cultural conversation. So this is the fractured cultureverse. How do you address a broad audience in this world and make pop culture references pop? So let's take another example from late last year on Saturday Night Live when Louis C.K. was the host.
Hey, everybody. Hey, I just want to thank President Lincoln here for everything that he's done for me. I mean, especially in my new job of shoveling horse into a wagon. Is that what you wanted?
I just don't have any.
You know what I mean?
Black friends.
He's got papers. Hard to be you.
So you totally get these jokes, right, if you watch the show Louis. But here's the thing, fewer than 2 million people watch Louis. About 7 million watch Saturday Night Live. So just according to math, optimistically, 2/3 of Saturday Night Live's audience is missing this particular joke. Now, decades ago, Saturday Night Live was able to skewer topics most people in the country knew about. Dirty Dancing, Mr. Rogers, Who Shot JR? Now, back then, Saturday Night Live drew more than twice as many viewers as it does today. And these days, when we have what feels like 1 billion channels instead of 4, it's hard to share a set of cultural references that everybody is going to get. But some shows do manage to pull it off with a certain amount of style. So I have a colleague named Linda Holmes who does NPR's pop culture blog, Monkey See, and she taught me what's known as the 2% rule. And the idea is that if 2% of your audience is getting the jokes, that's a good thing. Because then you've got 2% of your audience feeling really special and really bonded to you. Now the downside is everybody else not wanting to feel like, that they're uncool or that the show's trying to impress itself and its fans by how insidery it is. But we Americans might want to look at another model when it comes to the fun of not getting a cultural reference, of the joy of not being in on the joke, not understanding the reference, but just going with it. And we might have all had that experience when we watch comedy from the United Kingdom. Now, so maybe you've watched a Monty Python sketch that you didn't get it, but you laughed anyway. It was still funny. Or I don't know, maybe you've watched The Young Ones on MTV in the 1980s or on Comedy Central in the 1990s. If not, here's an idea of what you missed.
Stereotypes confirming the myth articulate outburst, didn't he?
Did you see that episode where the pig was going to have a baby? Now, that was quite a promising idea. But it was all done so bloody nicely. We didn't see anything. Even the policeman was nice.
All right, why shouldn't the police people treat us nice occasionally? You trendy students always giving us a bad name.
What, you mean like big jobbies?
Oh, right, now you really asked for it.
So what the hell's going on, right? I mean, but this British comedy convinced a sizable audience of Americans just to roll with the jokes that none of us could possibly have gotten unless we had some sort of mind meld with British popular culture. I mean, Felicity Kendall, that's an actress who got name dropped. I mean, who is that? And the answer is she's a completely obscure British actress who we never would have heard of because she's actually not that amazing, but she's a joke in Britain. And now that we have the internet, we can sort of engage with these kinds of pop cultural references and get the jokes. But when this was on Comedy Central and when it was on MTV, people didn't have it. They just rolled with it. So the thing, apparently, is to create a world that people want to live inside, that they somehow feel connected to, even if they don't belong there, or even if they don't fully understand what's going on. The Young Ones and Love and Hip Hop Atlanta make people think that somehow it is their world. It's a world they want to be a part of, even when it's not. Maybe it somehow has an opening that people feel like that they access. So let's look at a buzzy moment from late last year when Jodie Foster came out again at the Golden Globe Awards.
I hope that you're not disappointed that there won't be a big coming out speech tonight, because I already did my coming out about 1,000 years ago, back in the Stone Age, in those very quaint days when a fragile young girl would open up to trusted friends and family, co-workers, and then gradually, proudly to everyone who knew her, to everyone she actually met. But now, apparently, I'm told that every celebrity is expected to honor the details of their private life with a press conference, a fragrance, and a primetime reality show. And, you guys might be surprised, but I am not Honey Boo Boo Child. No, I'm sorry, that's just not me. It never was, and it never will be. But please don't cry, because my reality show would be so boring.
That's such a lie. Her reality show would be amazing, and I think we all know that. But I doubt that Jodie Foster actually watches Honey Boo Boo Child. And it's doubtful that most of the people she's addressing are also the target audience for Honey Boo Boo. But in this case, Jodie Foster is not making a cultural reference, so to speak. What she's really doing is referring to a culturally created idea that everybody agrees means the same thing. In this case, Honey Boo Boo equals decline of Western civilization. So the fractured cultureverse is the new normal. And one of the most interesting and inspiring things I feel like I heard during my explorations of it came from a novelist. And you have to forgive me because I do work for NPR, so I am right now going to cite a Pulitzer Prize-winning Dominican-American feminist novelist who draws on science fiction and Bronx street culture. Junot Diaz wrote The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and here he is on a show that NPR distributes called Fresh Air.
The experience that most of us have in the world is that we tend to live in a world where a good portion of what we hear, see, and experience is unintelligible to us. And that, to me, feels more real than if everything was transparent for every reader.
So he's talking about making this choice, making the 2% rule for his readers. So some of his readers are going to get his Spanish slang, of which there's a lot untranslated. Some are going to get his Wookiee references. A lot of his readers aren't going to get any of them, but Diaz says, welcome to what it's like to be an immigrant, like him. Welcome to what it's like to be in the United States for very many, many people. And in the fractured cultureverse, we're all immigrants watching television. And what we experience feels unintelligible sometimes, but it feels real too. And so maybe authenticity is something we can't completely understand, especially since we remember that time when television was a dominant cultural language. Now it's a bunch of vernaculars. The upside of this is now TV lets us listen in on conversations we wouldn't have been privy to before. It lets us listen to people we might not have heard. And maybe it might discover that we as audiences, consumers and marketers, belong in places that we didn't expect. Thank you.
Joining Netta, Hill Holiday's Adam Cahill.
Well, first of all, thank you for joining us. As a fan of your work, it's great to be able to sit with you and chat. The first thing I'm thinking about listening to you talk is, it seems like kind of a popular storyline is that culture is fragmenting, and that's a bad thing, that we're each kind of going into our subcultures and staying there. But the tone of your take on it seems really positive, and do you feel like it's a good thing?
I don't think anything is ever just one all good or all bad or black or white. But I guess one of the things I sort of think about is back when people used to listen to the radio, the way a lot of people found NPR was they would flip channels. That was before radio got completely homogenized, but that's a different story. And so, people who never thought that they might want to listen to NPR or country music or rap or whatever would flip and they'd hear stuff and they'd connect to it and they'd find that actually I like this. They'd listen more. Maybe they'd decide they'd hate it and they'd move on. But a lot of people, that was how they discovered classical music. And it seems like we have a possibility now where there's more than 4 channels on the television for people to have possibly the same experience.
So I wonder what that means for the idea of the water cooler. So it used to be you see Seinfeld, and then it gives people something to talk about. It helps you connect with people you don't know that well. So what do you do with the water cooler now? Is it that you're stitching together? You're trying to engage people in a different way? Or does the water cooler not matter anymore?
Or maybe it's a billion beautiful droplets. There's still a water cooler. I think we've all had the experience of connecting with a community of people who watch a show, even in 2013. But maybe it's on Facebook, or maybe it's social media, or maybe it's the group of nerds that you hang out with during the day at work.
It is interesting. This is not really a question, but maybe the surface level thing isn't as prominent as it was, but you can go deep really fast. So I think we can probably agree that Game of Thrones is the best show ever. But if you wanted to, if I was to tweet that, all of a sudden, literally, you'll start getting tweets in from some really intense people who want to go really deep on Game of Thrones. There's no halfway anymore.
Right, and that helps, of course, that it had, it's a fan base before the show even began. It had buy-in from a lot of people in advance. But what's interesting about Game of Thrones, right, and I know HBO had no idea that it was going to expand and reach people like the person I live with who hates fantasy in all of its forms and is addicted to Game of Thrones.
Is there any downside to not having sort of a dominant shared pop culture?
I think we all miss it, right? It's hard not to be nostalgic for the days when everybody watched The Cosby Show, and where, especially, these very sort of more pro-social, Norman Lear-like sitcoms really sort of seemed to drive the cultural conversation, and it gave us a sort of markers of where we were as a culture, and it was something that everyone could talk about. An entire nation, it felt, would wake up and knew who shot JR. I think it's hard not to miss that. But there's a trade-off, and the trade-off is we are getting stories and storytellers who wouldn't have existed in that kind of much more constricted, much more closed-off kind of world.
Yeah, I think it's hard probably to argue with the fact that pop culture might be getting more fragmented, but it's getting much more interesting. There's certainly much more opportunity to connect, and so I love your take on it, that we are all immigrants, and there is this opportunity to connect with interesting ideas that we wouldn't have seen before. So I'm gonna go with that. All right, thank you so much for joining us and starting our day off. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.